Maria Rodriguez had always been the invisible employee at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions. For 3 years, she'd worked as a junior analyst, arriving early and leaving late, while her colleagues barely acknowledged her existence. Her supervisor, Derek Thompson, made it his personal mission to remind her daily that she was lucky to have a job and that her work was mediocre at best. The other employees followed his lead, treating Maria like furniture that happened to speak occasionally. The toxic environment at Pinnacle was legendary. Derek ruled the marketing department with an iron fist, playing favorites with the younger, more attractive employees while systematically undermining anyone he perceived as a threat. Maria, with her quiet competence and dedication, somehow fell into the latter category despite never challenging him directly. She watched as her ideas were stolen. Her reports were criticized for imaginary flaws, and her requests for advancement were met with condescending lectures about knowing her place. Maria's cubicle sat in the corner of the office, deliberately positioned where she could see everyone but few could see her. She'd learned to appreciate this vantage point over the years, observing the office dynamics like a sociologist studying a particularly dysfunctional tribe. She noticed how Derek would flirt shamelessly with the female interns, how he'd take credit for successful campaigns while blaming failures on subordinates, and how he'd manipulate the weekly meetings to ensure his favorites received praise while others faced public humiliation. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in March. Maria had spent weeks developing a comprehensive marketing strategy for their biggest client, Premier Electronics. The proposal was innovative, thoroughly researched, and potentially worth millions to the company. She'd stayed late countless nights, sacrificing her social life and sleep to perfect every detail. When she submitted it to Derek, he barely glanced at it before dismissing her from his office with a wave of his hand. 2 days later, Derek presented Maria's strategy to the executive team as his own creation. He stood confidently at the head of the conference room, clicking through her slides and explaining her concepts as if they'd sprung from his own brilliant mind. Maria sat in the back row, invisible as always, watching her months of work being stolen in real time. The executives were impressed, praising Derek's innovative thinking and strategic vision. He accepted their compliments with false modesty, never once acknowledging Maria's contribution. After the presentation, Maria approached Derek privately, hoping to resolve the situation professionally. She explained that the strategy was her work and asked for proper credit. Derek's response was swift and cruel. He told her that junior analysts don't develop strategies, they just compile data. He suggested that she was delusional if she thought she was capable of such high-level thinking. Then he threatened her job, warning that any further insubordination would result in immediate termination. Maria returned to her corner cubicle feeling defeated and humiliated. She'd always believed that hard work and dedication would eventually be recognized, but Derek's betrayal shattered that naive hope. Her colleagues, having witnessed the exchange, avoided eye contact and conversation even more than usual. The message was clear. Challenging Derek was career suicide, and Maria had just painted a target on her back. That evening, Maria sat in her small apartment, staring at her laptop screen. She'd been working on her resume, updating it with her actual accomplishments rather than the diminished version Derek allowed her to claim. As she typed, her phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification. Someone had viewed her profile, someone from Apex Strategies, Pinnacle's biggest competitor. Marcus Chen, the director of strategic development at Apex Strategies, had been watching Pinnacle's recent success with growing concern. Their latest campaign for Premier Electronics was brilliant, far more sophisticated than anything Derek Thompson had produced in the past. Marcus had worked with Derek at a previous company and knew his limitations intimately. The strategy bore all the hallmarks of someone with genuine talent, someone Derek was clearly exploiting. Marcus began investigating, using his network of industry contacts to gather information about Pinnacle's team. Most of the names were familiar, mediocre talents who'd been recycled through various agencies over the years. But one name kept appearing in the background of successful projects: Maria Rodriguez. She was never credited publicly, but insiders whispered about the quiet analyst who actually did the heavy lifting while Derek claimed the glory. Intrigued, Marcus began following Maria's professional footprint more closely. He discovered that she'd graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern with a degree in marketing and communications, had completed internships at top-tier agencies, and had published several insightful articles in trade publications during her college years. Her credentials were impressive, yet she'd been buried in a junior position for 3 years while less qualified colleagues advanced around her. Marcus decided to take a calculated risk. He reached out to Maria through LinkedIn, not with a job offer, but with a simple message acknowledging her work on the Premier Electronics campaign. He mentioned that he'd recognized her strategic thinking and wondered if she might be interested in discussing opportunities in the industry. The message was carefully crafted to avoid any legal issues, while making it clear that her talents hadn't gone completely unnoticed. Maria's response came within hours. She was cautious but clearly interested in the conversation. They arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown, away from the prying eyes of either company. Marcus arrived early, curious to finally meet the woman whose work had been impressing him from the shadows. When Maria walked into the coffee shop, Marcus was struck by how different she seemed from the image he'd formed in his mind. She was confident and articulate, with an intensity that suggested deep intelligence and suppressed ambition. As they talked, Marcus realized that Derek hadn't just been stealing Maria's work. He'd been systematically destroying her confidence and professional reputation. Maria told Marcus about the toxic environment at Pinnacle, the constant undermining, and the recent theft of her premier electronic strategy. She spoke with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to document everything, protecting herself from future accusations of incompetence or insubordination. Marcus listened intently, his anger growing as he understood the full scope of Derek's manipulation. By the end of their meeting, Marcus knew he'd found something valuable, not just a talented strategist, but someone with intimate knowledge of Pinnacle's operations and a burning desire for justice. He made Maria an offer that would change everything: a senior position at Apex Strategies, a significant salary increase, and most importantly, the opportunity to work on the Premier Electronics account from the competitor's side. Maria's hands trembled slightly as she considered the offer. It was everything she'd dreamed of professionally, but it also meant declaring war on Derek and Pinnacle. She thought about the years of humiliation, the stolen credit, and the condescending lectures about knowing her place. Then she thought about Derek's smug face as he'd presented her work to the executives. "I'll need 2 weeks to transition my current projects," Maria said finally. "And I want to handle this professionally, despite how they've treated me." Marcus smiled, recognizing the steel beneath Maria's professional demeanor. "Take all the time you need. But Maria, I want you to know that at Apex, your work will be your own. Your name will be on your strategies, and your success will be celebrated, not stolen." Maria's final 2 weeks at Pinnacle were a masterclass in professional conduct under pressure. She completed her assigned projects with her usual thoroughness, documented all her work processes, and prepared detailed transition notes for her replacement. Derek, believing he'd successfully intimidated her into submission, barely acknowledged her presence except to pile additional busy work on her desk. The other employees watched Maria's final days with a mixture of sympathy and relief. They were sorry to see her go. She'd been a reliable colleague who never created drama. But they were grateful that Derek's wrath would no longer be focused on anyone in particular. Several coworkers privately wished her well, though none dared to express support publicly. On her last day, Maria cleaned out her desk methodically, placing personal items in a small box while leaving behind everything that belonged to the company. She'd been careful throughout her employment to maintain clear boundaries between her work and personal materials, a habit that now served her well. As she worked, she could feel Derek watching her from his office, probably ensuring she wasn't stealing company secrets. Derek's paranoia wasn't entirely unfounded. While Maria wasn't taking any confidential documents, she was taking something far more valuable: 3 years of institutional knowledge, understanding of client preferences, and insight into Pinnacle's strategic weaknesses. More importantly, She was taking her talent, creativity, and work ethic to a direct competitor. The exit interview with human resources was a carefully choreographed dance of professional courtesy. The HR manager, Jennifer Walsh, asked standard questions about Maria's experience and reasons for leaving. Maria provided diplomatic answers that couldn't be used against her later, mentioning seeking new challenges and career growth opportunities, without directly criticizing Derek or the company culture. Jennifer seemed to understand the subtext of Maria's responses. She'd conducted enough exit interviews to recognize the signs of a toxic work environment, and Derek's department had an unusually high turnover rate. But company politics prevented her from addressing the problem directly, especially since Derek's results, achieved through Maria's uncredited work, kept the executives happy. As Maria walked out of Pinnacle Marketing Solutions for the last time, she felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. The chapter of her life defined by invisibility and undervaluation was finally closing. She had no idea that her departure would trigger a chain of events that would expose Derek's incompetence and ultimately lead to his downfall. Derek watched from his office window as Maria's car pulled out of the parking lot. He felt a sense of satisfaction, believing he'd successfully driven out a potential threat to his authority. In his mind, Maria was just another weak employee who couldn't handle the pressure of a competitive workplace. He had no idea that he just handed his biggest competitor a weapon that would be used against him. Maria's first day at Apex Strategies felt like stepping into an alternate universe. The office was bright and modern, with an open layout that encouraged collaboration rather than hierarchy. Employees moved freely between departments, sharing ideas and resources without the territorial behavior that defined Pinnacle's culture. Marcus personally introduced Maria to the team, presenting her as a valuable addition whose expertise would strengthen their strategic capabilities. The contrast with her previous workplace was immediate and stark. At Pinnacle, Maria had been treated like an inconvenience, someone to be tolerated rather than valued. At Apex, she was welcomed as a professional equal, with colleagues genuinely interested in her background and perspective. The difference in treatment was so pronounced that Maria initially wondered if it was an elaborate facade that would eventually drop. Marcus assigned Maria to the Premier Electronics account, a decision that raised some eyebrows among the existing team members. They'd been working on the account for months, developing their own strategies to compete with Pinnacle's successful campaign. Maria's arrival suggested that management wasn't satisfied with their progress, a conclusion that could have bred resentment in a different environment. Instead, the team embraced Maria's expertise with professional curiosity. They recognized that she had intimate knowledge of the successful campaign they were trying to counter, and they were eager to learn from her insights. Maria was careful to share her strategic thinking without revealing any confidential information from her previous employer, walking a fine line between being helpful and being unethical. Within her first week, Maria had identified several weaknesses in Pinnacle's approach to the Premier Electronics account. The strategy Derek had stolen was comprehensive, but it was also static, designed for a specific moment in time without accounting for changing market conditions or competitive responses. Maria understood the strategy's limitations because she'd been prevented from implementing the adaptive elements she'd originally proposed. Working with her new team, Maria began developing a counter-strategy that would exploit these weaknesses. She couldn't use any proprietary information from Pinnacle, but she could apply her understanding of the client's needs and preferences to create a more flexible and responsive approach. The strategy she developed was entirely original, but it was informed by insights that Derek's team simply couldn't possess. Marcus watched Maria's integration with growing satisfaction. She was everything he'd hoped for: technically skilled, strategically minded, and professionally ethical. More importantly, she brought a perspective that came from years of observing the industry from the sidelines, seeing patterns and opportunities that others missed. Her insights were valuable not just for the Premier Electronics account, but for Apex's overall competitive strategy. As Maria settled into her new role, she began to realize how much her confidence had been damaged by Derek's systematic undermining. At Pinnacle, she'd second-guessed every decision, constantly worried about criticism and failure. At Apex, she found herself thinking more boldly, proposing innovative solutions that she never would have suggested in her previous environment. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was noticeable. Maria's colleagues began seeking her input on projects outside her assigned accounts, recognizing her analytical skills and strategic thinking. She found herself participating in brainstorming sessions and strategic planning meetings, contributing to discussions as an equal rather than remaining silent in the background. Meanwhile, at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions, Derek Thompson was beginning to realize that Maria's departure had left a larger hole than he'd anticipated. The detailed work that had always appeared magically on his desk was no longer materializing, and he found himself struggling to maintain the quality standards that had made him look good to the executives. Derek's first instinct was to blame Maria's replacement, a recent graduate named Kevin Phillips who'd been hired to fill the junior analyst position. Kevin was eager and hardworking, but he lacked Maria's experience and institutional knowledge. The learning curve was steep, and Derek had no patience for the adjustment period that any new employee would require. Kevin tried desperately to meet Derek's expectations, working late nights and weekends to produce the comprehensive analyses that Derek demanded. but he was working without the context and background knowledge that Maria had accumulated over 3 years. His reports were technically accurate, but lacked the strategic insights that had made Maria's work so valuable. Derek's frustration grew as Kevin's work failed to meet his standards. He began micromanaging every aspect of Kevin's projects, providing contradictory feedback and constantly changing requirements. The treatment was reminiscent of how he'd handled Maria in her early days, but Kevin lacked her resilience and determination to succeed despite the obstacles. The situation deteriorated rapidly when Derek was asked to present a follow-up strategy for the Premier Electronics account. The client was pleased with the initial campaign, but wanted to explore additional opportunities for collaboration. Derek confidently promised to deliver a comprehensive proposal within 2 weeks, assuming that Kevin would be able to produce the necessary research and analysis. Kevin worked frantically to meet Derek's expectations, but the assignment was beyond his current capabilities. He needed guidance and mentorship, but Derek was too busy taking credit for past successes to provide proper supervision. The proposal Kevin ultimately produced was adequate but uninspired, lacking the innovative thinking that had characterized previous submissions. Derek recognized the problem immediately, but had no solution. He couldn't admit that Maria had been responsible for the quality of work that had built his reputation, because that would undermine his credibility with the executives. Instead, he blamed Kevin's incompetence and began searching for ways to salvage the situation. The Premier Electronics presentation was scheduled for Thursday morning, and Derek spent the night before desperately trying to polish Kevin's work into something presentable. He added flowery language and confident assertions, but he couldn't disguise the fundamental weakness of the strategic thinking. The proposal was a pale shadow of the work that had impressed the client initially. Derek entered the conference room on Thursday morning with false confidence, hoping that his presentation skills would compensate for the proposal's shortcomings. The Premier Electronics executives listened politely as he explained the follow-up strategy, but their enthusiasm was noticeably lacking. They asked pointed questions that Derek struggled to answer, exposing the superficial nature of his understanding. The presentation ended with polite thanks and promises to consider the proposal carefully, corporate speak for diplomatic rejection. Derek left the meeting knowing that he'd failed to impress the client, but he was still unprepared for what happened next. Maria's counter-strategy for the Premier Electronics account was ready to launch just as Derek's follow-up presentation was falling flat. The timing wasn't coincidental. Marcus had been monitoring Pinnacle's activities through industry contacts, and he'd timed Apex's approach to maximize its impact. While Derek was struggling to maintain momentum, Apex was preparing to offer Premier Electronics something entirely new. The Apex proposal was comprehensive and innovative, addressing not just the client's immediate needs, but also anticipating future challenges and opportunities. Maria's insights into the client's corporate culture and decision-making processes allowed the team to craft a presentation that spoke directly to Premier Electronics' strategic priorities. Marcus scheduled the presentation for the following week, giving Premier Electronics time to process their disappointment with Derek's lackluster follow-up. The client's willingness to take the meeting so quickly after their previous presentation suggested that they were already having second thoughts about their exclusive relationship with Pinnacle. Maria felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as she prepared for the presentation. This was her opportunity to prove that the innovative thinking Derek had claimed as his own was actually her contribution. More importantly, it was her chance to demonstrate that she could succeed when given proper support and recognition. The night before the presentation, Maria reviewed her notes one final time. She'd been careful to develop a strategy that was entirely original, drawing on her general industry knowledge rather than any specific information from her previous employer. The approach was different from the work Derek had stolen, but it demonstrated the same strategic thinking and analytical depth. Marcus had insisted that Maria take the lead on the presentation, recognizing that her credibility with the client would be enhanced by their familiarity with her previous work. The decision was strategically sound, but it also carried risks. If the client mentioned Maria's connection to the original Pinnacle campaign, it could create awkward questions about her departure and current role. The Premier Electronics executives arrived at Apex's offices promptly at 9 a.m. on Tuesday morning. Maria recognized several faces from her time at Pinnacle, when she'd been the invisible analyst sitting in the back of conference rooms. Now she was standing at the front of the room, ready to present her own work under her own name. Maria began the presentation with confidence, outlining Apex's understanding of Premier Electronics' strategic challenges and market opportunities. She spoke with the authority of someone who'd spent years analyzing the industry, referencing trends and data that demonstrated her deep expertise. The executives listened intently, clearly impressed by her knowledge and insight. As Maria progressed through the presentation, she could see the executives' interest growing. They asked detailed questions about implementation timelines, budget requirements, and performance metrics. Maria answered each question thoroughly, drawing on her comprehensive understanding of the client's business model and operational constraints. The breakthrough moment came when Maria addressed a specific concern that had been raised during Derek's presentation the previous week. She explained how Apex's approach would solve the problem that Derek had failed to address, demonstrating not just superior strategic thinking, but also a more thorough understanding of the client's needs. The Premier Electronics executives exchanged glances during Maria's presentation, recognizing the quality of thinking that had been missing from their recent interactions with Pinnacle. The contrast was stark. Where Derek had offered superficial solutions and vague promises, Maria provided detailed analysis and specific recommendations. Her presentation felt like a return to the innovative approach that had initially impressed them. During the question and answer session, one executive asked Maria about her background and experience. She explained her role at Apex and her previous work in the industry, carefully avoiding any direct criticism of her former employer. The executive nodded thoughtfully, clearly connecting dots between Maria's expertise and the quality of work they'd previously associated with Pinnacle. After the presentation, the executives requested a private discussion with Marcus and Maria. They expressed strong interest in the proposal, but wanted to understand the competitive landscape better. The conversation that followed was revealing. Premier Electronics had been growing increasingly dissatisfied with Pinnacle's recent performance, particularly the decline in strategic thinking and innovative solutions. Marcus seized the opportunity to position Apex as a more reliable partner, emphasizing the company's commitment to client success and strategic excellence. He highlighted Maria's role in developing the proposal, subtly suggesting that her expertise would be consistently available for future projects. The message was clear. Apex could provide the quality of work that Premier Electronics had been missing. The meeting ended with Premier Electronics requesting a detailed proposal for a comprehensive marketing partnership. The scope of work they described was extensive, potentially worth millions of dollars in annual revenue. More importantly, it represented a complete shift of their business from Pinnacle to Apex, a competitive victory that would significantly impact both companies. Maria left the meeting feeling euphoric. For the first time in her career, her work had been presented under her own name and received the recognition it deserved. The client's enthusiasm was genuine, based on her strategic thinking rather than Derek's false claims. She'd proven to herself and others that she was capable of success when given the opportunity. Marcus was equally pleased with the outcome. The Premier Electronics account would be a significant addition to Apex's portfolio. But the real value was in demonstrating that his strategy of recruiting undervalued talent could yield substantial competitive advantages. Maria's success would make it easier to attract other talented professionals who were being underutilized at competing firms. Over the following days, word of the successful presentation spread through Apex's office. Maria found herself at the center of attention, receiving congratulations from colleagues and recognition from senior management. The contrast with her previous workplace was profound. Instead of having her contributions ignored or stolen, she was being celebrated for her achievements. The formal proposal took 2 weeks to complete, with Maria leading a team of analysts and designers to develop a comprehensive marketing strategy for Premier Electronics. The work was demanding but rewarding, as Maria finally had the resources and support necessary to implement her ideas fully. The proposal that emerged was sophisticated and innovative, reflecting the best of her strategic thinking. While Maria was basking in professional success, Derek Thompson was dealing with the consequences of his declining performance. The Premier Electronics account had been his crown jewel, the source of his reputation and credibility within Pinnacle. The client's growing dissatisfaction was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore, and Derek was running out of excuses for his subpar work. Derek's immediate response was to blame Kevin Phillips for the quality problems. He subjected Kevin to increasingly harsh criticism, demanding longer hours and more detailed analysis while providing less guidance and support. The treatment was counterproductive, as Kevin's confidence and performance deteriorated under the constant pressure and abuse. The situation came to a head when Kevin submitted his resignation after just 3 months on the job. In his exit interview, he cited Derek's management style and the toxic work environment as his primary reasons for leaving. The feedback was damning, describing Derek as unprofessional, unsupportive, and verbally abusive. Jennifer Walsh, the HR manager, was concerned by the pattern of turnover in Derek's department. Maria's departure had been followed by Kevin's resignation, and 2 other employees had requested transfers to different departments. The common thread was Derek's management style, which seemed to be driving away both talented and promising employees. Derek's response to Kevin's resignation was predictable. He blamed the younger generation's lack of work ethic and complained about the difficulty of finding qualified employees. He requested permission to hire a more experienced analyst, someone who could immediately produce the quality of work he required. The request was approved, but Derek's reputation as a manager was beginning to suffer. The search for Kevin's replacement took several weeks, during which Derek struggled to maintain his usual productivity. He found himself working longer hours, trying to compensate for the lack of analytical support. The work was more difficult than he'd expected, requiring skills and knowledge that he'd never fully developed because Maria had always handled the complex analysis. Derek's declining performance became more apparent as he juggled multiple projects without adequate support. His presentations lacked the depth and insight that had characterized his previous work, and clients began to notice the difference. The feedback was subtle but consistent. Derek's recent work seemed rushed and superficial compared to his earlier contributions. The Premier Electronics situation deteriorated further when the client requested a meeting to discuss their marketing partnership. Derek assumed this was an opportunity to repair the relationship and demonstrate his commitment to their success. He prepared extensively for the meeting, hoping to impress the client with his dedication and expertise. The meeting took place on a Friday afternoon in Premier Electronics' downtown offices. Derek arrived with a thick folder of materials, ready to present his vision for the partnership's future. The client executives were polite but formal, lacking the enthusiasm that had characterized their earlier interactions. Derek began his presentation with confidence, outlining his understanding of the client's strategic priorities and market opportunities. He spoke about the success of their previous campaigns and his commitment to maintaining that level of excellence. The executives listened politely, but Derek could sense their lack of engagement. The Premier Electronics executives allowed Derek to complete his presentation before delivering the news he'd been dreading. The company had decided to shift their marketing partnership to Apex Strategies, effective immediately. They thanked Derek for his previous work, but explained that they needed a more innovative and responsive approach to their marketing challenges. Derek's immediate reaction was shock and disbelief. He'd been so focused on his internal problems that he hadn't considered the possibility of losing the account entirely. The Premier Electronics partnership represented a significant portion of his department's revenue, and its loss would have serious implications for his position at Pinnacle. Derek tried to salvage the situation by asking what had influenced their decision. The executives were diplomatic but clear. They'd been impressed by Apex's strategic thinking and comprehensive approach to their marketing challenges. They felt that Apex better understood their business needs and could provide more innovative solutions. The mention of Apex's strategic thinking struck Derek as familiar, but he couldn't immediately place why. He asked for more details about their proposal, hoping to understand how a competitor had managed to win over his most important client. The executives provided general information about Apex's approach, praising their analytical depth and strategic insight. Derek left the meeting in a state of shock, struggling to process what had happened. The loss of the Premier Electronics account was a professional disaster, one that would be difficult to explain to his superiors. He'd built his reputation on the success of that partnership, and its sudden termination would raise serious questions about his capabilities. The drive back to Pinnacle's office gave Derek time to consider the implications of losing such a major client. The financial impact would be significant, but the reputational damage would be even worse. He'd been positioning himself for a promotion to department head, but the loss of Premier Electronics would make that advancement impossible. Derek's first instinct was to blame external factors, market conditions, client fickleness, or unfair competitive practices. He began constructing a narrative that would minimize his responsibility for the loss while maintaining his image as a competent manager. The story he developed focused on Premier Electronics' unrealistic expectations and Apex's likely use of unethical tactics. When Derek returned to the office, he immediately scheduled a meeting with his supervisor, Patricia Moore, to discuss the situation. He planned to frame the loss as a temporary setback rather than a fundamental failure, emphasizing his commitment to rebuilding the relationship and winning back the client. Patricia listened to Derek's explanation with growing concern. The Premier Electronics account had been a significant source of revenue and prestige for the company, and its loss would have serious implications for the entire marketing department. She asked detailed questions about the client's decision-making process and the competitive factors that had influenced their choice. Derek's answers were evasive and contradictory, suggesting that he didn't fully understand why the client had chosen to leave. His explanations focused on external factors rather than internal performance issues, a pattern that Patricia recognized from previous conversations about departmental problems. Patricia Moore had been monitoring Derek's performance with growing concern for several months. The turnover in his department was unusually high, and the quality of work had been declining since Maria Rodriguez's departure. The loss of the Premier Electronics account was the latest in a series of problems that suggested deeper issues with Derek's management and capabilities. Patricia decided to conduct a comprehensive review of Derek's department, examining client feedback, employee satisfaction, and project outcomes. She wanted to understand whether the Premier Electronics loss was an isolated incident or part of a broader pattern of declining performance. The review revealed troubling trends that Patricia had suspected, but not fully documented. Client satisfaction scores had been declining for months, with several companies expressing concerns about the quality and timeliness of Derek's work. Employee turnover was significantly higher than the company average, and exit interviews consistently cited management issues as a primary concern. Most concerning was the pattern of declining innovation and strategic thinking in Derek's projects. The work had become increasingly formulaic and conservative, lacking the creative insights that had previously distinguished the department. Patricia began to wonder whether Derek's previous success had been built on the uncredited contributions of his subordinates. Patricia's investigation led her to examine the timeline of Derek's declining performance, which seemed to coincide with Maria Rodriguez's departure. She pulled Maria's personnel file and discovered an impressive record of consistent performance and positive feedback from colleagues. The contrast with Derek's recent struggles was stark and suggestive. Patricia decided to reach out to Maria directly, hopping to gain insight into the department's dynamics and Derek's management style. She found Maria's contact information through LinkedIn and sent a carefully worded message requesting a conversation about industry trends and professional development. Maria responded positively to Patricia's outreach, agreeing to meet for coffee to discuss the marketing industry and career opportunities. The conversation that followed was revealing, as Maria provided a diplomatically worded but clear picture of the toxic culture that had developed in Derek's department. Maria described the systematic undermining of employees, the theft of creative work, and the atmosphere of fear and intimidation that Derek had created. She was careful not to make direct accusations, but her account painted a picture of a manager who was more interested in claiming credit than developing talent or serving clients effectively. Patricia listened with growing understanding, recognizing the patterns that explained her department's declining performance. Derek's management style was not just toxic but counterproductive, driving away talented employees and stifling the innovation that clients valued. The Premier Electronics loss was a predictable result of this dysfunctional approach. The conversation with Maria also revealed the extent to which Derek had been claiming credit for work he hadn't done. Maria's strategic thinking and analytical skills had been the foundation of the department's previous success, but Derek had systematically erased her contributions while building his own reputation on her efforts. Patricia thanked Maria for her insights and wished her well in her new position at Apex Strategies. The conversation had provided the context she needed to understand her department's problems and begin developing solutions. Derek's days as a department manager were numbered, but Patricia needed to handle the situation carefully to minimize damage to the company. Armed with a clearer understanding of the situation, Patricia began documenting Derek's performance issues and developing a plan to address the problems in his department. She knew that any action against Derek would need to be carefully justified and legally defensible, given his senior position and the potential for wrongful termination claims. Patricia started by reviewing Derek's recent performance evaluations, client feedback, and project outcomes. The evidence of declining performance was clear and well documented, providing a strong foundation for disciplinary action. She also examined the department's financial performance, noting the significant revenue loss from the Premier Electronics account. The next step was to investigate the allegations of credit theft and employee mistreatment that Maria had diplomatically suggested. Patricia interviewed several current and former employees from Derek's department, asking about their experiences and the department's culture. The feedback was consistently negative, describing a toxic environment where employees felt undervalued and intimidated. One particularly damaging interview was with Kevin Phillips, the recent graduate who had resigned after 3 months. Kevin provided detailed accounts of Derek's abusive behavior, including public humiliation, impossible deadlines, and constant criticism. He also described how Derek had claimed credit for work that Kevin had done, a pattern that seemed to repeat with other employees. Patricia also spoke with other department heads, asking about their interactions with Derek and their perceptions of his work quality. The feedback was telling. Several colleagues had noticed the decline in Derek's output and had begun questioning his strategic capabilities. The consensus was that Derek's recent work lacked the innovation and insight that had characterized his earlier contributions. The financial impact of Derek's management failures was becoming increasingly clear. Beyond the Premier Electronics loss, several other clients had expressed dissatisfaction with recent work, and 2 smaller accounts had already moved to other agencies. The department's revenue was declining, and its reputation was suffering. Patricia prepared a comprehensive report documenting Derek's performance issues, the department's declining results, and the pattern of employee complaints. The evidence was overwhelming, but she knew that removing a senior manager would require approval from upper management and careful handling to avoid legal complications. The report went to Pinnacle's executive team, who reviewed it with growing concern. Derek had been a visible and successful manager, and his sudden decline was both surprising and troubling. The financial implications were serious enough to warrant immediate action, but the company needed to proceed carefully to protect itself from potential litigation. The executives decided to place Derek on a performance improvement plan, giving him 90 days to address the identified issues and demonstrate significant improvement. The plan included specific goals for client satisfaction, employee retention, and project quality. It also required Derek to undergo management training and regular performance reviews. Derek's reaction to the performance improvement plan was predictable. He blamed external factors and questioned the fairness of the evaluation process. He insisted that his recent struggles were temporary and that he could quickly return to his previous level of performance. The executives listened politely, but remained committed to the improvement plan. The news of Derek's performance issues spread quickly through the office, creating a buzz of speculation and gossip. Employees who had suffered under his management felt vindicated, while his few supporters worried about the implications for their own careers. The department's morale began to improve as people realized that Derek's behavior was finally being addressed. Derek's 90-day performance improvement plan became a source of constant stress and anxiety. He knew that his career at Pinnacle was hanging in the balance, and the pressure to demonstrate immediate improvement was overwhelming. The specific goals outlined in the plan seemed achievable individually, but the combination of requirements created an almost impossible standard. The client satisfaction requirement was particularly challenging, as Derek had limited control over existing relationships that had already been damaged by his previous performance. He found himself scrambling to repair connections with clients who had grown skeptical of his abilities, while simultaneously trying to develop new business to replace the lost Premier Electronics account. Derek's attempts to improve employee relations were hampered by his inability to acknowledge or change his fundamental management style. He tried to appear more supportive and collaborative, but the behavior felt forced and insincere. His employees recognized the performance plan as the reason for his temporary transformation and remained skeptical of his motives. The management training required by the improvement plan was particularly frustrating for Derek. He'd been managing people for years and resented the implication that he needed to learn basic leadership skills. The training sessions focused on communication, delegation, and employee development, areas where Derek's deficiencies had been most apparent. Despite his resistance, Derek began to understand some of the feedback he'd been receiving. The training helped him recognize patterns in his behavior that had been counterproductive, particularly his tendency to micromanage and claim credit for others' work. However, understanding the problems was different from being able to change ingrained habits. Derek's biggest challenge was producing quality work without the analytical support that had previously been provided by Maria and other talented subordinates. He'd never fully developed the research and strategic thinking skills that his position required, having relied on others to handle the complex analysis while he focused on presentation and client relations. The pressure of the performance improvement plan began to affect Derek's health and personal life. He was working longer hours than ever before, trying to compensate for his lack of analytical skills through sheer effort. The stress was manifesting in physical symptoms, including headaches, insomnia, and digestive problems. Derek's relationship with his wife, Linda, became strained as he brought his work problems home. She'd been supportive of his career advancement, but was concerned about the toll the current situation was taking on his health and their family life. Derek's constant anxiety and irritability made him difficult to live with, creating tension in their previously stable marriage. As the weeks passed, Derek's performance showed some improvement in certain areas while declining in others. His client relations improved slightly as he focused more attention on relationship building, but the quality of his strategic work remained inconsistent. The lack of a strong analytical foundation made it difficult for him to develop the innovative solutions that clients expected. The most telling indicator of Derek's struggles was his continued inability to retain and develop talented employees. Despite his efforts to improve his management style, the department's turnover remained high, and new hires struggled to meet expectations without adequate support and guidance.